Well, good morning, Internet friends. It's Sean Strickland with Poison Spider Remuda and training here in Christoval, Texas. Uh, Man, we're in the barn this morning. It's still dark outside. We just got the horses fed. As you can tell, I got a felt hat and a sweater on. The mornings are getting chilly. It was in the 40s this morning here, and that's not super cold to some of my friends up in the North Country and in the East. But it's chilly for here, and the horses are darn sure feeling it. They're jumping and kicking, and they're loving it. There's a couple things that I wanted to come to you today and talk to you about cold weather with your horses, though, going into the winter. Some of these things are pretty important for horses if you keep them stalled. Not maybe as important for the horses out in the pasture that have natural cover and they're used to it. But for a lot of the people who watch our videos, their horses are stalled, and but some of this will pertain to those outside horses. One of the first things I want to talk about is wormer. I always like to worm my horses in the fall. I also do it in the spring, but those worms will start to go dormant in those horses, and you want to catch them before they start going dormant. And so that's one thing that I always do. It's a personal preference, and there's some science behind it too. I'll be honest, I'm not real up to date on all the science, but I just know that it needs to be done in the fall, and so I would highly recommend that you get your horses wormed going into the fall or going into the winter. And get that gut taken care of. Get them little critters killed up in there. We don't want those horses having to have all those worms in their guts and try to stay warm and try to eat enough and drink enough in the winter, plus combat a parasite in their body. One thing too is if you blanket your horse. We blanket some of our horses in our stalls. Some of the other horses we don't blanket. It's a personal preference. Some of the show horses we do blanket. If you do blanket your horse, that's fantastic. For the pasture horses, I really don't recommend blanketing your horse unless you just have like a small paddock out there or something that you can constantly kind of keep an eye on them. There's nothing worse than a horse getting hung up in a tree, a fence post, a gate with a blanket on them. Same thing with a halter. Don't ever turn your horse out to pasture with a halter on. But if you do blanket your horse, a couple things. Make sure you have the right size. You don't want it too small where it's too tight on them, and you don't want that thing way too big where it's just dragging on the ground and it becomes a hazard. Also, one other thing, if you do blanket your horse, don't ever put your blanket on a wet horse. That's a good way to make your horse colder. If you do have your horse and he or she is wet, the one thing that we have done that works really good is we get one of those coolers that we use at the show, and it's made of wool. We'll put that over them, and that wool will wick that moisture away from the horse. We'll wait till they get dry, then we'll put our warm blanket back on top of them. So think about that before you put your blanket on. Is my horse dry? Go for it. Is my horse wet? No, let's wait till that horse dries. Couple things about feed in the winter. Man, these horses, they've got to stay warm. They're going to require more calories in the winter, and water is incredibly important. Whenever we're actually giving them more hay and a little bit more grain because they're using that energy to keep their body warm, a lot of times they might not drink as much water. And if we don't have all that water in there, we're going to start getting some compaction in that gut. And then when compaction happens, then colic happens. So water is incredibly important during the winter. For the pasture horses, it's kind of hard to keep some warm water around. But if you got a stall and these horses are in a stall and they're not able to run around and jump and stay warm, let's give them a little bit more feed, and then let's keep an eye on those water levels. I like to put a salt block in my pens in the winter. Naturally, those horses will drink after licking on that salt block, so that's a good way to make sure that your horse is getting the water that they need. Let's see some other things. Let's talk about training in the winter. That's always a tough one. You get on a colt, you get on your old trusty horse, and they're feeling froggy in the morning, and they should, they feel good. Don't go straight into training your horse. Give your horse some time mentally and physically to warm up. And whenever I ride my colts in the wintertime, a lot of times I'll saddle them up, and instead of jumping on them right here at the barn, I maybe walk them to the arena and just let them, get that walk out. If they want to hog around a little bit, that's fine. The last thing I want to do is get on a colt and him start or she start bucking with me, because that's the one thing that we try to stay away from. And but when I do get on them, I don't just go straight to loping circles. I don't go straight to trotting. I may just walk my horse out a little bit. I may pull them to the left. I may keep them tight to the left and to the right. I'm going to keep their mind busy. So if they do feel froggy, I've got control of that nose right off the bat. And then I'll go to trotting. Let's get those muscles warm, and let's get that mind warm before we go straight into training. Sometimes for the cowboys out in the pastures, you ain't got a lot of choice. You got to saddle up, you got to go. And that's understandable. But for the people who are, maybe riding in the arena a little bit, let's get your horse physically and mentally prepared before you start your training process. And let's see, what else can we talk about? We talked about the blanket, we talked about wormer, we talked about water, we talked about feed, we talked about training your horse, and just overall body condition. Like I said, these horses, they rely a lot more calories in the winter. And a lot of the times we can't tell our horse's body condition because they have super long hair if it's those pasture horses, and even some of those stall horses if they don't have blankets. Always watch your body condition. It is incredibly hard to catch a horse up, but it's incredibly easy to lose a horse's condition. So think about your feed, think about your water, and look at their body condition. Maybe put a little salt in their pen so they lick it and then go to that water. But other than that, that's just a few tips for you. Oh, another big tip. I'm looking at my bits here. There is nothing worse than putting a cold, super cold bit in a horse's mouth. If you have the chance, if your car is out there running, if you come up to the barn and you're about to ride, I like putting it in front of the heater. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like to put a piece of cold metal in my mouth. So I keep a little heater in my tack room here, and it keeps all my gear warm. And so that's pretty darn important. And then also, when you are training your horse, you don't want to overdo it in the winter. If you think about it yourself, if you're out there, let's say you're on a football field, a soccer field, or whatever it is, some kind of sport, and you get super sweaty, it starts getting harder and it hurts to breathe a little bit. That's super cold. So let's not overdo our horses in the winter whenever we're training on them. And it's the same thing for the summer. We don't want to overdo them anytime, to be honest with you. But really think about it. There's no quicker way to get a horse sick than getting them all hot and bothered. They're breathing in that cold air. Their body is hot. And before you know it, you're going to have snot coming out of that nose. So other than that, guys, I hope those little tips will help you get through your winter, as we're just now starting to get close to it here in Texas. Some of y'all have already seen snow. You've seen below freezing weather. And so just take care of your horse, take care of yourself, and just enjoy your time with your horse. Other than that, keep you a tight rope and a short rein, and we'll see you at the next video. Thank you.